Income Tax 2020 Free Tax Tools. Come in, relax with Income Tax 2020. Whether you're doing your own tax return or you're doing tax returns for others, being a tax professional or just learning tax in general, you want to be familiar with some of the resources out there for tax preparation, including the resources for the tax law, thinking about it in terms of theory. This kind of lines up to our angles or our different kind of perspectives when we're thinking about the tax preparation, one being with regards to the actual tax formula, which is kind of closer to tax theory when we're trying to think of the law and what will be the impact of tax law on basically the end result. We're probably thinking in terms of a formula in our mind. The actual tax returns, the actual forms that will be filled out line by line, and then also we might think about it in terms of software, how to put the information or use tools to populate software both for the tax preparation and for estimates possibly for how much we're going to have to withhold in the future or tax planning type of purposes. Now, we talked about the proprietary software, some of the major proprietary softwares that could be used for those resources, and also just simply Excel, a tax formula and whatnot that can be used for those resources. You also, of course, want to be familiar with the IRS website, which can be found simply at irs.gov, irs.gov. And so it's an easy website to find. Remember, anything with a gov basically means it's going to be a government website as opposed to .com or something like that, which is typically commercial and so on. So the IRS website and some of the resources included in the IRS website. And again, you kind of want to be familiar with these even if you have your own software, just so when people ask you about them, you can say, okay, these are the pros and cons of the software that's out there, because there is a free file tool with the IRS website, and you can go to the IRS website and type in free file and in the search menu, and that'll typically find the free file tool where people that are in certain categories can then file their tax return with basically software like information on the IRS website online, which can be a useful tool. Now, typically this would be done, or people might want to do this if their income was below a certain threshold, or in other words, because of that, usually their taxes are more basic, simpler tax returns. So if you have a more basic tax return, then you might use a tool such as this after your income gets over a certain threshold or becomes more complicated in general. Then you probably want to be looking for an accounting firm so that the accounting firm can, one, fill out the tax return properly, but two, also give you more advice that you're going to be needing at that point in time, which might include tax planning and looking towards the future. So you can check out this tool and test it out with yourself or clients and see how it might fit. Also note that one limitation as well, when you look at the IRS website, you're looking at the federal taxes. And oftentimes people have a state tax requirement as well, depending on the state that they are in. So you want to make sure that when you're looking at the software, and that you may have state accessibility here as well, but whatever software you are looking at, you want to make sure that it's covering all your needs, which would typically be the best if it would do both the federal and state tax returns at the same point in time. So you might want to research that more here to see if it will be picking up the state that you would need, depending on what you would be using it for. So pick an option based on your income. So income of $69,000 or below can have the free federal tax filing on the IRS partner site. State tax filing free with some offers, right? Free with some offers. So you want to make sure that the state would be picked. Guided preparation, simple answer questions. So it's going to be in the format, I would assume, of kind of like a TurboTax as opposed to like a LaCert, meaning it's going to have more of an interview type of process, walking you through the data input process, which could be good if it's your individual tax return or someone that doesn't have a lot of tax preparation experience to have that interview type software. And then it has an online service, does all the math for you. And that's going to be one of the benefits, of course, of the software. It does the math, which we can kind of then double check with an Excel sheet so that we do it in two separate areas and kind of do the calculation for it. But obviously the software doing the math, as the math gets more complicated, as tax returns get more complicated, is nice. Now, if your income is above the $69,000, there's the free file electronic forms you fill out and file yourself. So these would be free file electronic forms, which are going to be basically, I'm imagining here, I haven't actually filled a tax return with these free file forms, but I might test it out later just to check it out, but putting the information directly into the actual forms in this way. Now, this one is going to be a little bit more complex because you will not have the interview process, right? You could still do it for free, but you'd have to actually do the data input more into the actual forms, do more of the calculations yourself, and you can utilize the instructions in order to help with that. So that might be a resource to just be aware of and possibly use for practice. So there's no state filing with this method, which is a major limitation. You should know how to prepare paper forms, which again is difficult because even tax preparers are always using tax software. You want to be able to prepare a paper form. Just do it a few times so that you can understand the layout of the 1040, but it's not something that people, even tax preparers do all the time. They use software to fill it out. Basic calculations with limited guidance. So these are some options for the filing online. Also note that the resources for forms and instructions are online, of course, as well. So if you just want to know more about a particular form or just check out a form, we will often be jumping to the software to do that into Lacerte, but you can find all those forms here as well. You can just go to the IRS website, you can look up the form and check it out. And then you can also look up the instructions. So if you go to the irs.gov websites, that would be under forms and instructions here. Just simply go to forms and instructions, and then you can search any form you want. Some of the major forms will then be down below here, and you can just check out the forms, and it'll typically have both the form and the instructions. So obviously the form 1040 is here. You have the instructions for the form 1040. If you have any questions about the 1040, this is pretty detailed instructions about them. And then you can go to any sub form that you want, like a Schedule A, which would be itemized deductions. So we can go to Schedule A and check that out. Now note, all the forms might not be out yet at this point in time. So you'd have to look at possibly prior year forms until the current year has then been populated, but once it's populated and update, you should be able to find then the forms here. There's also a tool for projections out to the future. And this is really useful for people that want to know how much should be withheld on their taxes, or if you're just doing projections, if you just want to do a projection and say, well, what if this happened? And that's often what tax professionals will do when the income tax gets kind of complicated, is we're going to start to say, okay, what's going to happen next year? Let's do some what if analysis. Let's run some scenarios and see how much tax you might owe in those situations and help you decide what kind of path you might want to be taking and make sure you get your withholdings down. Now, software is useful to do that, and that's one tool that will typically be used by tax professionals. If you don't have software, and you could use this tax withholding estimator tool, which is getting more and more like a projection tool, because basically when you're trying to figure out your withholdings, how much to withhold on your taxes, then it used to be you could do that fairly simply, because you basically had, if it was just an individual that had one job, like many people had, then it would be pretty basic to figure out the withholdings, even with a complex progressive tax system. Or if you had one family and still only one person working in that family with one job, you could still do it fairly easily and figure it out. But now, you got families with both spouses are working and multiple people might be working. You might have 3 jobs. You might be doing some gig work and some other work. It's not common, or it's not the standard. It's not simply the norm anymore that you got a one job household. And that means that with a progressive tax system, it's much more difficult to figure out what the withholdings will be because of the progressive tax system. So that means this software, this IRS is providing this tool to kind of help to calculate the withholdings. And basically to do that, you basically have to do a full projection. So this can help to calculate withholdings, but it can also help, to run basically projections, because you're taking in the information. So that's a useful tool to check out if people have questions about next year, about how much they should withhold on their W-4s and whatnot, or how to fill out their W-4 and how much they should withhold. Then this is a useful tool to be able to look at. And again, it's in essence similar to software, tax software that would be used to project out into the future. And the IRS is providing more and more of these types of tools. So those are some useful tools to be aware of. Again, you want to be aware of the IRS website. And as we go forward, we'll be focusing in on tax returns. And when we look at actual forms, then you want to be aware of this forms and instructions area, where you can then, take a look at the forms, download any forms you need, whatever we're taking a look at, and you can read more in depth with the instructions related to those forms.